When Pete Hegseth stepped into that hearing, he expected a spotlight, not a reckoning. Confident and camera-ready, the Fox News commentator and Army veteran came prepared with talking points, aiming to blame media narratives and woke agendas for military decline. What he didn't expect was Jasmine Crockett. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't grandstand. But in under 2 minutes, she dismantled his entire argument, using his own words, "You're raising your voice because your argument is falling apart." That sentence, quiet but surgical, cracked through the room like thunder. Phones went up. Social media lit up. Capitol Hill braced. Republic. Jasmine Crockett, a Texas Democrat with a reputation for relentless preparation, wasn't there to perform. She came to expose the gap between rhetoric and reality. The hearing had been billed as routine. Oversight. Testimony. The usual theater. But when Hegseth accused the military of prioritizing diversity over readiness, Crockett calmly leaned in. "Mr. Hegseth, you've said before that the military should reflect the people, not just look good in recruitment ads. That was March 8th, correct?" He nodded. "Then today, you say diversity harms troop morale. So which is it?" The pause said everything. Then came the pivot, the volume, the defensiveness. But Crockett didn't flinch. "I'm not asking for your opinion," she said. "I'm asking what you meant. Because your messaging changes depending on the room." And just like that, it wasn't about ideology anymore, it was about inconsistency. Theatrics collapsed under the weight of evidence. When Hegseth asked if she was calling him dishonest, Crockett didn't miss a beat. "I'm suggesting the record speaks louder than your volume." By the end, his frustration was audible. Hers never broke the calm. What made the moment viral wasn't outrage, it was control. Quiet, unshakable, and deeply prepared, because Crockett didn't show up for applause. She showed up with receipts. And in doing so, she reminded everyone watching, power isn't in who talks the most, it's in who does the work. Jasmine Crockett knew the risks. A direct confrontation with a white male witness, especially one as media-savvy as Pete Hegseth, could backfire. Headlines might frame her as hostile. The whispers would come, just like they had before. But none of it mattered, because she knew the material. Her calm, cutting cross-examination wasn't lucky. It wasn't emotional. It was earned. The result of hours of research, strategic framing, and total command of the facts. People often misread Crockett as reactive. The truth? She's exacting. Strategic. The kind of person who reads everything twice and watches everyone once, closely, and yet, preparation alone doesn't explain how she stayed so composed when Hegseth's voice started to rise. What followed wasn't just about accuracy, it was about tone, control, and the rare ability to dismantle a man used to dominating every room he entered. That morning in D.C., tension hummed just beneath the surface. Hegseth's presence had the room buzzing before the hearing even began, staffers whispering in elevators, reporters refreshing their notes. He wasn't some obscure analyst. He was Pete Hegseth, Fox News regular, veteran, and master of soundbites. He entered like a man who'd done this 100 times, navy blazer crisp, handshake firm, confidence unmistakable. He greeted Republicans with easy smiles, even clapping one on the shoulder. He didn't so much as glance at the Democrats' side of the table. Crockett noticed. She offered him the smallest nod when he took his seat. He didn't return it. 4. Cameras were in the room. C-SPAN. Local affiliates. One national freelance stringer. It looked routine, but the room felt tight, overcrowded with anticipation. The gavel dropped. The hearing came to order. Hegseth launched into his opening statement. Polished. Provocative. He talked about wokeness, about apolitical correctness infecting the ranks, and how we're training social workers instead of warriors. Some members scribbled notes. Others looked vaguely bored. Crockett didn't move. She didn't take notes. Because she already had them, she watched. That's the thing. Hegseth wasn't testifying. He was performing, for cable news, for clips, for his base. And Crockett knew it. The more outraged she got, the more material he'd have for primetime. She wasn't going to give him that. Then the chairwoman turned to her. "Congresswoman Crockett, you have 5 minutes." Crockett didn't glance at her papers. She didn't need to. She looked Hegseth in the eye. "Mr. Hegseth, thank you for being here," she began. "You served in uniform, correct?" "Yes, ma'am. 3 tours. And you speak often about military morale, especially around diversity and inclusion, correct?" Proudly. She nodded, turning a page. "I've reviewed your public statements, radio, TV, podcasts, for the last 18 months. Something stood out." He shifted slightly. The room hushed. "Do you stand by your quote from April 12th, the military should reflect American diversity as a strength?" "I do," he said, voice steady. "Interesting," she replied. "Because just moments ago, you suggested inclusion efforts were harming morale. I'm wondering what changed in just 90 days. The air thickened. Hegseth blinked. Adjusted his tie. Looked down at his notes. "I'm not sure what you mean, Congresswoman." She didn't flinch. "You said that a military should reflect its people. Then you said diversity undermines readiness. Those can't both be true." He tried to recover. "What I said in April was meant in context. Diversity is good, but not when it becomes the mission itself." "So the quote is accurate," Crockett said, "but it means something different now?" He hesitated. "It means what I said." Crockett flipped another page. Calm. Relentless. July 5th, your podcast. "You said, the last thing we need are leaders focused on race and gender metrics when we should be building warriors. Is that still your position?" "It is." "And does that contradict your April statement?" "Not if you understand the nuance." That's when Crockett leaned back. Just slightly. And gave a half laugh. Not mean. Not mocking. Just disappointed, and the entire room felt it. "Nuance," Crockett said evenly, "is a luxury the people serving under you can't always afford. What they hear are mixed messages about who belongs in uniform and who doesn't. And your words? They reach millions. So forgive me if I take them seriously." A few people in the hearing room exchanged glances. No one said a word. The silence itself was starting to gain weight. Hegseth looked down the table, perhaps hoping for a rescue from a Republican ally. None came up. That's when Crockett reached for a manila folder. Receipts. Literally, she pulled out 3 printouts. Each marked with quotes, timestamps, and dates. These weren't clips taken out of context or cherry-picked headlines. These were full transcripts, his own words. In one, Hegseth praised the Navy for recruiting more diverse candidates. In another, he warned diversity efforts were a distraction. And in a third, he claimed inclusion initiatives were weakening force readiness. She laid them out, one by one, flat on the table. "I just want to understand, Mr. Hegseth," she said, voice low and steady. "When exactly did diversity go from a strength to a threat?" His mouth opened, but no words followed. He leaned forward, then back again. Finally, he muttered, "You're twisting my words." Crockett didn't blink. "No, sir. I'm reading them." A quiet gasp came from the back row. Someone dropped a pen. An aide instinctively reached for their phone. Hegseth tried to pivot. "Congresswoman, you're missing the bigger issue. We're at risk of losing our military edge because this body is obsessed with identity politics." Crockett leaned in slightly. "And you're missing the fact that your own words make it hard to know what you actually believe. Either diversity is a strength, or it's not. But you've said both, depending on who's listening." That landed harder than any outburst ever could, because Pete Hegseth wasn't used to this. Not to being pressed. Not like this. He lived in spaces where contradictions were rarely called out, especially not by someone like her, but Crockett wasn't there to embarrass him. She was there to hold him accountable, and the distinction mattered. Still, the tension kept climbing. People were waiting for him to regain control, to hit back with confidence. But every time he tried, she countered, with dates, quotes, and facts. No speculation. Just receipts. "You're creating a narrative," he finally said. She tilted her head. "No, Mr. Hegseth. You created the narrative. I'm just reading it back to you." That line? It would be clipped, captioned, and broadcast by nightfall. But in the room, it wasn't entertainment. It was a takedown. Still, she wasn't done. Her next question wouldn't be about contradictions, it would be about tone. For a moment, all you could hear was the HVAC humming overhead. Even the stenographer paused. Crockett sat back in her chair, elbows resting lightly, her demeanor still calm. "Let's set the quotes aside," she said. "Let's talk about what you've done since sitting down." He waited. "You've used words like ideological cancer, wokeness, hollow force. But you haven't defined any of them. You haven't offered a single policy example. Just grievances, no evidence." Hegseth straightened. His voice lowered. "If you don't believe there's an ideological problem in the military," he said, "you haven't been talking to the same troops I have." "I have," she said. "Just last month at Fort Leonard Wood. I sat with instructors, enlisted soldiers, 2 junior officers, 1 Latina, 1 black. You know what they asked me? Not about wokeness. Not about culture wars. They asked if Congress would finally stop playing budget games long enough to fix their housing." He opened his mouth, but she raised a finger. "No. I'm not finished. Because people like you light the fire, then blame the heat on those trying to put it out." That hit deep. Hegseth leaned in, tone darker. "With all due respect, Congresswoman, I've seen what happens when leadership gets soft. When we lose focus on the mission. And I've seen what happens when people confuse discipline with silence," she replied. "You're not here because you served. You're here because you talk about serving. There's a difference. One you don't seem to respect, especially when it comes to service members who don't look like your idea of a soldier." For a moment, Hegseth's composure cracked. His eyes narrowed. His voice sharpened. "This is exactly the problem. Everything becomes about race. Gender." Crockett cut him off. "No. Everything becomes about accountability. And when someone tries to pin you down, you change the subject. This isn't about identity. It's about credibility. Yours." The blow was clean. Final. Quiet. Point 1. That made people in the room pause and reassess what they were witnessing. At Hegseth's voice rose, edging toward anger. "Let me be clear." Crockett didn't budge. She met his eyes. Calm. Clear. Then she said the line that would define the day. "Are you raising your voice because your argument is falling apart?" Boom. Not from her. Not from him. From the room. Point 2 staffers gasped. A reporter mouthed, "Wow." One committee member pressed his lips together, trying not to smile. "It wasn't theater. It was reckoning." Hegseth leaned back, but it was too late. The clip had already been captured, and the truth didn't need to shout. It just needed to be heard. Crockett hadn't just challenged Hegseth's volume, she had flipped the dynamic entirely. No yelling. No finger pointing. Just quiet, relentless logic standing its ground against performance, and now, he was stuck. If he got louder, he looked fragile. If he got quieter, he looked defeated. He reached for his water, took a sip, and said nothing. Crockett, unbothered, glanced down at her notes like nothing had happened, but something had. The power in the room had shifted, not just among the lawmakers seated there, but in the national narrative already brewing beyond those walls, outside. America was watching, and reacting. Hegseth slowly set his cup down, as if trying to recalibrate, but Jasmine Crockett didn't wait. "Mr. Hegseth," she said, steady as ever, "you've said more than once that political agendas are undermining our military strength. But do you think your agenda, your framing, your selective criticism, doesn't contribute to the very erosion you claim to oppose? There was no sarcasm. No smugness. Just sharp, clipped precision. Her voice never rose, but her words sliced. Clean. Hegseth adjusted his mic. Congresswoman, I speak plainly. People appreciate that. Plain, she replied, doesn't always mean honest. Sometimes it just means convenient. A soft ripple moved through the room. She wasn't chasing headlines, she was doing what so few in that chamber dared, making it matter. Hegseth tried to pull the moment back. I'm not against inclusion, he insisted. I'm against ideology. Being forced into the ranks. I've seen what that does to cohesion. Crockett gave the faintest shake of her head. You keep saying ideology like it only applies to the people you disagree with. But your own ideology, Mr. Hegseth, your choice to frame patriotism as narrow, rigid, performative, that's ideological too. It just hides behind a flag. That cracked something wide open. She wasn't accusing him. She was exposing him. He opened his mouth. Then closed it. Then leaned forward, voice tightening. You're just trying to discredit me because you don't like my tone. No, Crockett replied, calm. I'm calling out the effect of your tone. And let me be clear, when a man with your platform speaks in absolutes, belittles perspectives he doesn't share, and paints difference as danger, it has consequences. The wire was tightening. Hegseth exhaled sharply. I've been on the front lines. I've buried friends. I don't need a lecture on consequences. There was a beat, then Crockett said, evenly, I'm not lecturing. I'm responding. You were brought here as a witness, not a preacher. But instead of facts, we got fear. Instead of data, we got noise. That stopped him. Hegseth scanned the room, perhaps hoping someone would jump in. No one did. On both sides of the aisle, lawmakers were locked in. This wasn't a hearing anymore. It was a reckoning, because Crockett wasn't trying to win in the traditional sense. She was confronting a deeper issue, the idea that some people can say whatever they want, however reckless, and never be questioned, and then she said the thing few expected. I don't doubt that you care about this country, Mr. Hegseth. I don't doubt that you've served honorably. But caring isn't a shield from criticism. And service doesn't give you a pass to rewrite the rules when they no longer suit your message. He looked stunned, not because she dismissed his service, but because she respected it without backing down. Because she refused to play the usual game. There was ice in her delivery. And that made it land harder than any raised voice ever could. Hegseth tried to close the exchange. You've made your point, he muttered. Crockett nodded once. No, Mr. Hegseth. You made the point. I just organized it. That line didn't echo, it settled, like smoke in the lungs. People watching at home didn't need context. They didn't need a transcript. They felt the shift, something raw, something unscripted, was happening, between two people who couldn't have been more different, yet were now locked in a confrontation neither would walk away from unchanged. To Crockett leaned in once more. We are not enemies, she said. We are responsible adults, tasked with guiding this country. But we can't guide anything if we reward volume over honesty. That was it, the moral heartbeat of the entire exchange. Outside, the reaction was building fast. Journalists, veterans, even apolitical watchers began sharing the clip. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. Someone had finally challenged a talking point with facts, without flinching, and held the room to a higher standard than ratings. The clip spread like wildfire. At first, just a few phones lifted at the back. Staffers pretending to jot notes, but stealing glances at each other. You could feel it, the foundation beneath the usual political theater had cracked. Crockett didn't raise the temperature with volume. She changed the climate entirely, by being calm, by being prepared, by refusing to surrender ground. She didn't need to yell. She had the receipts. And the room could feel it. On the left, a few colleagues allowed quiet smirks to escape, people who'd seen women like Crockett told to sit still while men like Hegseth dominated the air with bluster. They'd seen this formula before. But this time, it wasn't playing out the way anyone expected. On the right, unease was creeping in. One member shifted uncomfortably. Another tapped his pen against the table. A third cleared his throat, then thought better of interrupting the chairman, normally a stickler for the clock, let Crockett go nearly 30 seconds over her 5-minute window and one stopped her. No one wanted to, because even those who disagreed knew they were witnessing something they couldn't control. That was the moment the hearing stopped being politics and became something else. Online, the first wave hit. Did y'all just see Representative Crockett dissect Pete Hegseth? She handed him his own quotes and buried him with them. Surgical. Then came the clips. One from a local feed. Another from a staffer's phone. Clean audio. Crisp delivery. Are you raising your voice because your argument is falling apart? It looped everywhere. Reaction videos. TikToks. Commentary duets. Not just viral, dominant. Inside the chamber, Hegseth looked different now. Not panicked, but smaller. His jaw tight. His answers shorter. His confidence dialed back, like someone had swapped out his mic for a dead one. Crockett, meanwhile, had gone quiet. She'd said what she came to say. No gloating. No smugness as she leaned back, hands folded, letting the next member ask their question as she didn't need to say more. She had already changed the room. And now, she was changing the conversation. The room had already answered for her. Up in the press row, reporters were typing like their fingers couldn't move fast enough. One leaned over and whispered to the journalist beside her, "She just made a name for herself today." The other didn't look up. "She already had one," she said. "Now she has momentum." By the door, a staffer from a nearby office stood still, arms crossed. She hadn't been assigned to the hearing, she came because someone said, "This one might get interesting." She wasn't disappointed. 2 floors above, in a break room, a junior legislative aide named Brixton stood over a phone with a few interns, replaying the clip. Crockett calmly flipped pages. Hegseth flailed to recover. "She cooked him without blinking," one intern said. "No yelling. No theatrics. Just work," Brixton replied. "That's the scariest kind of opponent, the kind that doesn't even need to raise her voice." Even some conservative commentators were caught off guard. A military blogger with a sizable following posted, "I respect Pete, but Representative Crockett was locked in. This wasn't I gotcha. This was accountability, with receipts." The ripple didn't stop there. Veterans groups weighed in. Some praised Hegseth's service but admitted the inconsistency in his messaging was undeniable. One post from a retired Marine captain cut deep, "Service doesn't excuse spin." Crockett didn't disrespect him. She held him to the standard he claims to represent. Back inside the hearing room, business resumed. The chair called on the next speaker. Hegseth adjusted his seat, eyes fixed on his water glass. The tension had thinned, but the energy was different now. The balance had shifted. People weren't just watching the hearing anymore. They were watching her, and Crockett's moment wasn't over. Outside the chamber, the clip was already climbing the charts, and the fallout was just beginning. America was about to pick sides. By the time the hearing adjourned, Jasmine Crockett was trending in more than a dozen cities. First, it was a few journalists who'd been in the room, sharing short quotes and screenshots. Then came the commentary, some praising, others scrambling to downplay it, but the moment that stuck wasn't edited. It wasn't polished. It was raw. Crockett, still and steady. Hegseth, leaning forward, voice rising a little too fast. And that single line, "Are you raising your voice because your argument is falling apart?" It didn't just trend, it pulsed. People weren't just quoting her. They were watching the full exchange. Over and over. Not because it was loud, but because it was real. By 4 p.m., one TikTok version had crossed 1 million views. On X, the same clip had racked up 8 million impressions. Before dinner, cable news picked it up fast. On MSNBC, a panel of former prosecutors broke it down line by line. "This wasn't a stunt," one said. "This was a lawyer, doing what lawyers do, dissecting, documenting, dismantling." CNN ran a split screen, Crockett on one side, Hegseth on the other. Even the anchor paused mid-sentence. "Look at how Still she is, he said. She never shifts. That's control. Even Fox News had to weigh in. The headline read, "Combat of Words, Representative Crockett lashes out at Hegseth." But the comments told a different story. Dozens of viewers praised her composure. She didn't lash out, one wrote. She just let him walk into his own words. Late-night hosts didn't wait up by that evening. Crockett's line had landed in multiple monologues. "You ever get hit so hard by facts your own quotes start sweating," one joked. But beyond the headlines and hot takes, something deeper was happening in classrooms across the country. Civics teachers played the clip, not to push politics, but to show what calm, evidence-based confrontation looks like. A teacher in Sacramento said her middle school students spend a full period discussing body language, tone, and accountability in law offices. Young attorneys shared the video as a masterclass in courtroom poise, how to lead with facts, not flair, even within military circles. The reaction was mixed, but serious. Some veterans admitted Hegseth hadn't come ready to be questioned. One retired officer said it reminded him of briefings where junior officers quietly knew more than the generals. Meanwhile, back on Capitol Hill, Crockett wasn't doing victory laps. She wasn't on cable shows. She wasn't retweeting praise. She went back to her office, closed the door, and sat down with her team. According to a staffer, the only thing she said was, "All right. Let's prep for the next one." No spotlight chasing. No celebratory post, just the work, but people noticed that night. Her inbox overflowed, thank you notes, messages from veterans, a few from active duty service members. "We saw what you did," one read. "We needed that." The biggest surprise came from across the aisle. A Republican congressman from Arizona, quiet during the hearing, sent her a private message, "Didn't agree with you. But damn. That was masterful." That alone said everything. In a world where shouting usually drowns out substance, Jasmine Crockett had made substance impossible to ignore. She didn't walk out of the hearing as a social media star. She walked out as a standard, and that's what made the moment matter. While the country replayed it, clipped it, quoted it, Crockett was already thinking ahead, because for her, this wasn't about one moment. It was about what comes next, and her reason for fighting ran deeper than most people would ever know. Late that night, long after the lights had gone off and the building had emptied, Jasmine Crockett sat alone in her office. The room was quiet. The glow from her screen soft. Her phone buzzed every few seconds, colleagues, press, celebrities she didn't know, but she didn't pick up. She didn't post. She just sat there, still. Focused. Unmoved, waiting for what came next. She sat quietly, one foot tucked beneath her, eyes fixed on a quote pinned beside her desk. It was printed in black ink, slightly faded from sun and time, a line from her first campaign speech back in Texas, "If no one checks power, power forgets the people." That's what all of this was about. Not Hegseth. Not the cameras. Not even the viral clip now being picked apart by pundits and podcasts. It was about holding up a mirror to a system that had grown far too comfortable letting people say anything, so long as they said it with confidence. Crockett never expected to be here. Not growing up in St. Louis. Not after scraping her way through law school on a threadbare budget. Not even when she won her first seat in the Texas House and was told, plainly, that she'd never make it to D.C. Not polished enough, they said. But she made it. And she didn't come to play along. Her calm at the hearing wasn't just self-control. It was strategy. It was armor. She knew the rules of the game. If she raised her voice, she would be the headline, not the contradictions, not the content. That's how they flipped it. Every time. So she trained for that. Not just in facts and policy, but in tone, in restraint, in being unshakable when someone talked over her, and precise when someone tried to generalize. Because she knew, especially as a black woman, how fast a camera could turn you into a caricature, just for holding your ground, but she also knew how to flip that camera right back. This wasn't her first confrontation. Back in Texas, she once stood in a committee room for 6 straight hours, grilling a state official over a prison abuse scandal. No cameras. No applause. Just her, a stack of notes, and a voice that didn't waver. She went home that night too tired to eat, shoes still on, and cried on the couch to no one outside that room ever knew. But she knew it mattered to so when Hegseth started tossing out absolutes, phrases meant to sound strong but built on nothing. She recognized the moment, not as an opportunity, as a responsibility, because she'd heard that tone before. In prosecutors bragging about convictions without remorse for ruined lives. In politicians who didn't expect to be questioned, especially not by someone like her, but Crockett never doubted she belonged. Her goal wasn't to be liked. It was to be ready to speak when others stayed silent. Ready to cite page numbers when others relied on outrage. Ready to stand alone if no one else would challenge a narrative that needed breaking, and she knew the cost. The praise would come, but so would the backlash. The threats. The slurs. The emails calling her divisive, aggressive, ungrateful. She'd seen it all before, but none of it mattered compared to the other messages, the quiet ones, like the one from a young woman in Oklahoma. I watched the hearing today. I've never seen someone who looked like me speak so calmly to someone who didn't respect her, and still walk away with the whole room. That's why Crockett fights. Not for applause. Not for virality, but to show what it looks like to hold the line, without ever raising your voice, because the story wasn't just about her. By the next morning, the questions began to shift. If she held her ground, what did it say about those who stayed silent? And what does it say about a system that allowed it to happen again and again, until someone like her finally said, enough? By sunrise, the headlines were everywhere. Crockett silences Hegseth in viral exchange composed. Relentless. Unshaken. Fox host fumbles as Crockett turns up the heat, quietly. But for Jasmine Crockett, none of that was the point. She didn't walk into that hearing looking for headlines. She walked in with notes. Preparation. Purpose, because moments where truth meets bluster don't happen by accident. They happen because someone shows up ready, when others won't, and the country noticed. Overnight, her name reached places where no one had heard it just 2 days before. Not because she yelled. Not because she shocked anyone. But because she did something rare. She stayed calm. She stayed sharp. And she didn't flinch in a media culture where shouting equals strength. Crockett flipped the formula. She didn't interrupt. She didn't insult. She listened, and when it was her turn, she used one thing only, facts and nothing more. Nothing less, and that's why it landed so hard, because this wasn't just about two people with opposing views. It was a referendum on leadership itself. Do we reward performance, or preparation? Anger, or accuracy? Volume, or values? Whether she meant to or not, Jasmine Crockett made a case for something deeper, a kind of leadership rooted in clarity, not chaos. In service, not spectacle. If Pete Hegseth entered that room expecting to dominate, he left having learned a hard truth. You can't bluff your way past someone who did the work, and that moment didn't just live on social media. It showed up in classrooms. In town halls. In everyday conversations. Be like Crockett, one civics teacher told her students. Come to the table with facts, not noise. Even lawmakers on both sides started saying it. More hearings like this one. Not because of the drama, but because it felt real, because someone finally said out loud what so many had been thinking, and that's the power of a moment like this. It reveals what's been simmering underneath for far too long. People are tired of the outrage machine. Tired of egos drowning out everything else. They want something steady. Grounded. Accountable. Crockett didn't just hold Hegseth accountable. She reminded the country that facts still matter, that control isn't weakness. That preparation is power. The lesson wasn't just for politicians. It was for anyone who's ever been dismissed, talked over, underestimated. You don't have to yell to be powerful. You just have to speak your truth, with clarity, because when you do that, people listen, even the ones who tried not to. So yes, the clip will keep circulating. The headlines will keep spinning. The memes and edits will all have their moment, but underneath it all, something more durable has taken root, a new standard, not just for politics, for public discourse. A reminder that sharp doesn't have to mean loud. That quiet confidence can sometimes move more than any slogan ever could. And in a time where so much of what we hear is meant to provoke instead of inform, Jasmine Crockett showed us what it means to say, no more noise. Just answers. That's the question she left behind. And it's one worth carrying.